I'm babysitting a dragon. There's something you don't say every day. Though if Cool gets to stay, we might have to fix up something similar to daycare for him on a more regular basis. Katara had a bad feeling about the situation, which was unusual since Katara wasn't one to worry easily. Surprisingly, the part about being left to babysit a dragon all alone wasn't the part she was concerned about. She could take care of herself. Also, the dragon had simply laid down and stayed oddly motionless so far. I could try to talk to him, but what would I say? Uncomfortable silence it is, then. Although Katara's trust in the goodness of her fellow men had suffered a blow after she learned her jet's deception, she wasn't generally wary of strangers if not given a reason to be. It was usually Sokka who played the somewhat annoying but arguably necessary role of the suspicious one. For some reason, however, Sokka wasn't being as cautious today as Katara would have liked him to be, and since Aang was openly trusting of people you've only met as a rule, Katara felt she needed to step up and be the one to keep a watchful eye. The part that bothered Katara the most was why the dragon had followed them in the first place, especially after Cole had made such an effort to rid himself of their company the last time they met. Despite his animalistic movements and consistent behavior, Cole was obviously more than just a dumb beast, and was the combination of smart and unpredictable that worried her. The gang could deal with vicious monsters, and best even the most ruthless of firebenders, but Cole was something different, something new, the like of which they had yet to encounter. She didn't know what the dragon was up to, or even wanted, but she had a hunch there was more going on than what met the eye. Katara wished Cole hadn't shown up right now, or preferably at all. They had enough on their plate with studied waterbending, fending off the Fire Nation, and getting the Water Tribe to see things their way, most notably to give up some of their more silly customs. Dealing with Cole could have waited until after they had a better idea of what to do about the Fire Nation fleet. In Katara's opinion, even if the dragon would turn out to be harmless, they would have done without another unknown into the equation. The whole thing boiled down to the fact that Katara didn't trust Cole, and not in the way you don't trust your pet, because he is known to be impulsive and silly at times. Katara distrusted Cole at the same way she distrusted anyone whose standing, opinions, and involvement in the war were unclear. The fact that Cole was technically a firebender didn't help. Even if the dragon wasn't on the Fire Nation's side in the war, he was fire, which meant he was wild and destructive by nature. From what she had witnessed, the people of fire had lesser morals than people from other nations did, maybe even no morals at all. Of course, Katara had no plan to act against Cole. Not without proof there was foul play underway, but her instincts told her to be careful all the same. Only time would tell if her worries were justified. Aang and Sokka returned as they had promised, in no time at all, bringing with them the happy news that Cole was welcome to stay, as long as certain precautions were taken. Namely, they would have to take care of and keep an eye on the dragon themselves. Aang, of course, was excited and inly optimistic. Should be great. I never had a dragon before, but I know people from the Fire Nation who knew people who had dragons, and I love animals, so it shouldn't be that hard to take care of him, right? First we need a place for him to stay. Aang and Cole don't really get along on their previous encounters, so I think it might be best that they don't bunk together. I've heard of this other great stable where we can set up a place for Cole. I'll bet he'd get along just fine with the polar dogs. Katara didn't have the heart to point out that having a dragon as a pet might not go splendidly with Aang's vegetarian lifestyle. She turned to see why Sokka was being unusually quiet, and she had to bite her lip and hold back a laugh at what she saw. It was difficult to say who looked more incredulous, Sokka or Cole. Seriously, that's your plan? Sokka finally got out, raising an eyebrow dramatically. He looked between Katara and Aang as if expecting an answer to a rhetorical question, and then sighed. Yeah, sure. For the record, I'm not against the sleeping arrangement you just suggested, even if it means scaring a pack of unsuspecting polar dogs senseless. But you still have to get Cole sold on it, and something tells me that just isn't going to happen. Between you and me, Cole doesn't come across as the type to prefer an animal shelter, no matter who he's sleeping with. All children turned their attention to the dragon, who looked mildly perplexed, and then nodded at Sokka, and turned to deadpan at Aang as if saying, "Over my dead body." The look on the dragon's face was so expressive even Aang got the hint. Or maybe we could give him a place of his very own. Somewhere close to ours? He wouldn't fit in our sleeping quarters, but we could ask if there's another vacant igloo close by. Or, Katara said with a smile and a gesture of her hand, we could build him one. Aang beamed. Of course! Why didn't I think of that? Aang was already on his way to the house Chief Nulk had given them for their stay with the tribe, babbling excitedly. Katara looked at the dragon to see what his thoughts of this option. Cole looked unsure, even worried. When he noticed Katara looking, the dragon made a visual effort to look regal and long-suffering. He nodded his approval once. At that, Katara did laugh. Cole looked surprised and a little annoyed, but then he flashed a soft grin at her and moved to follow Aang. Katara realized she had never seen the dragon smile before. For being so big and predatory, Cole was surprisingly kind small, a bit shy and insecure, but it seemed like he meant it. Katara wondered that if maybe she had been wrong about the dragon. Maybe what she saw as aggression might in fact be roughness caused by a lack of prior dealings with humans. Maybe Cole has led a very solitary lifestyle up until now, Katara found herself considering. Sokka had said something about dragons being almost extinct, and that Cole might be the last of his kind. As the last waterbender of her tribe, Katara couldn't help but sympathize. Eventually, though, she shook her head. One way or another, she was overthinking things, reading too much into a simple gesture. Sokka had gone after Aang and Cole, and Katara came up next to him. She needed to have a word with her brother. Sokka, I need you to look after Cole. Sokka turned to look at his sister. To his surprise, Katara looked as serious as she sounded. Sure, though I think Cole was pretty much to look after himself. I could try to offer him some beef jerky, but it might be more than a hunt and kill your own food type of guy. Food, which is, before you ask, fish, I'm quite sure. Katara rolled her eyes. Do you ever not think of food? Anyway, that's not what I meant. You should make sure Cole doesn't hurt anyone. Sokka was surprised. Cole wouldn't hurt anyone. I've never seen him even... Okay, well, I've seen him sort of attack people, but they were bad people. Besides, Cole saved Aang from the Fire Nation, and helped save the village, and saved me from the militia. Surely you can't believe he's our enemy. We don't know what he is, or what he wants, and before we do, you have to keep an eye on him. Resigned, Sokka nodded. Why me? First, because you are the one who vouched for him, and told everyone we can trust him even though we barely know him. Chief Nulk agreed to this arrangement because he trusts our word, and we need to be worthy of his trust. But besides what you told people, Cole isn't Aang's dragon. I'm not even sure he's tame. So one of us has to make sure he isn't a danger to us or the tribe. Sokka frowned in thought. He could see Katara's point, but it still felt unfair to say that it was Sokka's responsibility in particular to look after Cole. He might have met the dragon first, but other than that, he really didn't know the dragon any better than the rest of them. Okay, I see your point about Cole, but I still gotta ask why me? I've got stuff to do, and I'm sure Aang would love to. Aang has to focus on studying waterbending. The whole world needs the Avatar, and Aang cannot defeat the Fire Nation before he has learned all 4 bendings. Sokka narrowed his eyes, though most playfully. What about you, then? We should take turns. Katara turned to look at her brother and answered seriously. I need to study hard too, because when Aang is finished with waterbending, we will go with him to look for an earthbending master. If Aang needs help with water later, I have to be skilled enough to help him, because I doubt there will be any more waterbending masters in the Earth Kingdom. Sokka felt like sighing, but opted against it. Most of the time, he didn't care less at all about the magic and the rest, but sometimes, just sometimes, he was jealous of Katara. Somehow, being a bender was this big deal and made her important, and sometimes it didn't feel fair that her splashing around was considered more important than whatever he was doing. That said, Sokka knew how much his chance meant to Katara, and would never be the one to take it from her. Fine, Sokka drawled out, pretending more to be offended than he was. I'll look after Cole. But I still sure you're freaking out over nothing. He's one of the good guys. Katara nodded, and smiled her thanks. Sokka smiled back. Although the siblings bickered all the time, there was little they wouldn't do for each other. Apart from Gran, and now Aang, they were all the family they had had for years. And family is important. Family looks out for one another. Also, Katara smirked and bent a small snowball to hit Sokka in the back, the same way she used to when they were kids playing Snow War. I have to become strong so that I can protect both of you when the Fire Nation gets here. Sokka nodded. He tried to look more sure than he felt. He really hoped he was right about Cole. Because if he wasn't, Sokka wasn't sure how he might fight back against a flying, fire-breathing giant. What am I doing here? Zuko lay on the icy rooftop, his head between his paws, occasionally glancing at the water-bending practice taking place on the ice plateau next to the building he had curled up on. In this icy city, Zuko was unsettling quick, grown used to having waterbenders around him wherever he went. The prince had been with the Northern Water Tribe for 2 days now, and had already lowered his guard around them, probably faster than was entirely healthy for a firebender hiding among enemies. But it wasn't like he could jump at shadows his whole stay. It wasn't very useful, or dignified. Zuko lifted his head just in time to see Katara take down her unsuspecting sparring partner with a waterfall-like wave. Zuko couldn't help but be a little bit impressed. In his short time and mobile life, Zuko had rarely had a chance to follow up closely on young Bender's progress, and never someone who wasn't a firebender. Even so, Zuko was pretty sure Katara had to be a prodigy to have improved so much in such a short time. The choice of attack was a bit of an overkill, the dragon contemplated, but I'm the last person to lecture on the habit of overdoing things. Master Pakku appeared pleased enough. Zuko couldn't quite hear what he was saying, but if the smile on Katara's lips was anything to go by, the old master found no fault in her choice of attack. Zuko sighed and turned away, although he found all the bending very curious to observe, when they weren't being used to attack him at least. It had rarely had an opportunity to see waterbending up close. Zuko's mind was preoccupied with thoughts of his own current progress, or rather lack thereof. Time is running out, and I have no choice to prevent the upcoming bloodshed than I have 2 days ago. The prince had honestly thought that getting into the Northern Water Tribe would be the hard part. Even spying on the Water Tribe, although somewhat complicated by the fact that at least one of them understood that he was more than a dumb creature, was coming along quite nicely. His plans to prevent, or at the very least affect, the upcoming battle, on the other hand, appeared to be going nowhere. Zuko felt like he was dancing on knives. It was dangerous and frustrating, but at the same time, endlessly boring. Zuko had spent the past few days gathering information on the Water Tribe's strengths and weaknesses, attitudes and plans, while attempting to remain as innocent as possible. Any information on either side of the upcoming battle could prove invaluable in reaching his goal of saving, well, everyone. As the Prince of the Fire Nation, Zuko's main goal was to keep alive himself, his uncle, his crew, and as many Fire Nation citizens as he could manage. However, it was hard not to sympathize with the Water Tribe as well, especially since in the upcoming battle, they would be protecting themselves, their homes, and their families, while the Fire Nation would be the invading army. Zuko's nation was at war, and the Water Tribe was the enemy. He couldn't lose sight of that. That said, Zuko was resolved to try to protect the least of the Water Tribe citizens, to the best of his ability, given the invasion fleet arrived. He loved his country, and didn't want to become a traitor. But just like with his quest to capture the Avatar, there are things Zuko could not do. Orders be damned. Once you had questioned the legitimacy of your orders, it was hard to go back to blind faith. The prince had been very aggressive or daring with his spying activities so far, primarily because new and potential vital information seemed to pour at him from all sides. Regardless, the Water Tribe was an isolated people. They didn't know much about the rest of the world, which meant they spoke almost exclusively of their own lives and circles. The option of secretly shape-shifting back into human to do more precise reconnaissance on foot was definitely still on the table, but so far Zuko had deemed a daring midnight ninja mission as an unnecessary risk. Despite his lack of progress, Zuko hadn't been idle. Just after 2 days, he had a much better understanding of the Water Tribe's culture, hierarchy, and way of life. Their customs were somewhat similar to those of their southern counterparts, but in many ways not. The Northerners lived of hunting and gathering, mostly fishing, like the Southern Water Tribe, but were more coordinated, had by far a greater populace instead of a cluster of separated villages. They were essentially governed people, most of whom stayed in the capital at least some part of the annual cycle. They had next to no dealings with any other tribe or nation, but they did have extension trading among their own people. With the battle looming over the horizon, people from the nearby countryside had been pouring into the capital city. They came here either to join the army to help defend their home, or to seek out shelter inside the fortress-like capital. The Northern Water Tribe society seemed to be more hierarchical than its southern counterpart, although still nothing compared to the Earth Kingdom or even the Fire Nation. Zuko had known from the studies of the Northern Water Tribe was a monarchy, But he had known much more than that. He was a little surprised to find out that the throne was passed down in one family, rather than from one powerful chief to another. Since personal strength and charisma played a vital role to a man's standing in social hierarchy in the Northern Water Tribe, Zukor's presumed lineage wasn't what important to them, man being a key word, of course. These people didn't tolerate women fighting, never mind ruling. In Zuko's opinion, their culture was full of strange contradictions, their line of succession being one of them. Benders were respected, almost worshipped, and still their king and their heirs weren't Benders. Apparently the members of the royal family were considered more spiritual and political leaders than powerful warrior kings. Zuko could appreciate the logic in that, since unlike the rest of the world, the Northern Water Tribe was normally at war. Political guile would be more useful to a peacetime leader than great physical prowess. Still, war or peace, Zuko doubted a non-Bender would ever be accepted on the Dragon Throne, and though actually made him a little ashamed of his own culture. Surely a Bender wasn't automatically better suited to rule than a non-Bender. From what he knew of the Earth Kingdom, the place appeared to have many kings, who were all, to varying degrees, subjects of the Earth King. Some kings were chosen purely because of their lineage, and others because they were powerful Benders. Though customs were important in the Earth King, so lineage took priority most of the time. The differences in customs were understandably, considering they were a large, divided, versatile kingdom it was, and was logically most of its parts were governed. Even if the Earth King was the acknowledged leader outside Ba Sing Se area, the central governing was loose at best. Zuko wasn't entirely sure what mattered more in the Fire Nation, lineage or bending, since the issue virtually never came up. Everyone in the royal family were powerful Benders, and only married other powerful Benders from equally long lines of Benders. Although bending wasn't hereditary, but a gift from the spirits, Benders more often gifted with powerful and strong-willed Bender children. Yet the odds of a non-Bender being born as a heir to the throne were next to none. Looking at the issue from that angle, it was no wonder Ozai had been so angry and ashamed when it had taken Zuko longer than the usual to showcase any bending talent, even though Ozai had not been the Fire Lord at the time. Zuko had not been the first in line for the throne. His father must have taken the gossip about Zuko being without Agni's gift as a personal insult to his persona. Even after Zuko eventually proved himself a firebender, Ozai had always been harsh on his son, especially when it came to bending, accepting nothing short of perfection, or maybe Ozai wasn't especially hard on Zuko, but on both his children, and Zuko was simply on the one unable to meet his expectations. Either way, Ozai was always considered Zuko as the inferior bender, and had never missed an opportunity to point it out. Zuko shifted in his place, huffing in frustration, and got up. He hated the calm before the storm. It made him fidget, like an enemy just beyond your sight, or a thundercloud just below the horizon. Waiting for something bad and seemingly unavoidable to happen always made him feel small and insignificant. Ara said that patience was a crucial part of all plans. It was like playing Pie's show, giving your pieces into the right place without your enemy realizing what you were up to. Careful planning was just as important as putting your plan into action. Too bad Zuko had no significant pieces under his control just yet, and the prince had a gnawing feeling that were forces at play far greater than his own, laughing at his futile attempts to change the course of history. Still, Zuko had never been one to give up just because everyone told him that he was trying to accomplish was impossible. Zuko's gaze sought out the Avatar. Aang had gotten tired of listening to Master Pakku, again, and instead was using his airbending to toss around snowballs. Zuko smirked. As annoying as Aang's lack of focus was, Zuko would have been lying if he claimed the Avatar's childlike innocence wasn't at least a bit endearing. Innocence and optimism were hard to come by these days, and Aang was a living remembrance of a happier, more peaceful time. The things he said and did didn't always make sense, but he was a curious thing nonetheless. Aang was a contradiction. He was a symbol of hope, but also a wild card. And so, Zuko was starting to see a pattern of Aang's behavior. Most of the time, Aang was, much like his predecessors, an entirely reactive force. Like Avatar Kyoshi with Chin the Conqueror and Avatar Roku with the Fire Lord Sozin, he reacted to threats only to have them come knocking at his door. And no sooner, whenever Aang had encountered something he considered wrong, he would do whatever it takes to make it better. However, apart from reacting to obvious injustice, the Avatar didn't appear keen on being the one to start fights, not even to take precaution measures to avoid future conflicts. The fact that the Avatar was a reactive force maintaining order, rather than a proactive force initiating change, must have been part of the reason why the Avatar used to be popular among all four nations. Especially after what happened to the air nomads. Most people in the world wanted to hold on to the good things they already had, and were afraid to change. People feared things would only get worse, and perhaps the exception of the Fire Nation. If Aang started telling people what to do ethically, expecting them to share and compromise on their current comforts in the name of common good, he would lose support, at least among the well-off. Still, the world had changed much in Aang's absence, and the current Avatar's position was vastly different from that of the Avatars that came before him. If Aang ever hoped to end the war and restore balance to the world, the kid would have to take a more active role. Likely with this upcoming invasion, for pacifists, Aang's surprisingly unconcerned by the looming battle. Everyone knows it's coming. Know even before I told them, and they expect the Avatar to do something about it. And Aang will, once it gets here, and not a moment sooner. Aang wanted to wait until the last minute, hoping things would work out on their own. However, for someone in Aang's position, doing nothing isn't neutrality, or the peaceful and fair thing to do. Doing nothing is already showing preference. Zuko could try to force Aang to see that he needed to stop fooling around and come up with a plan, but the realization would probably go over better if Aang figured it out on his own, without prodding. Besides, Zuko was fairly sure that eventually Aang would take action to further his goals, and that was a day Zuko would fear and look forward to it. The day Aang would take his job as the savior of the world seriously would either be the making of him or his greatest mistake, depending on how the Avatar decided to go about reaching his goals, and with whose guidance. The kid was just 12 after all, who was bound to be looking for help from some direction. The good thing about Zuko's current situation was that he would keep an eye on the Avatar without rising suspicion, since the Avatar's gang followed him wherever he went. Also, Aang wasn't the least bit suspicious of Zuko, and although the Water Tribe siblings were normally more wary, all in all, the situation was rather stable. Aang may not be doing much, but at least he's doing something productive with his time. I'm doing no better in regards to the invasion myself. Unfortunately, despite knowing the invasion was coming and having an inside man on both sides of the battle, Zuko's actual odds of being able to call the whole thing off wasn't great. As much as being a dragon warrior is supposed to give him extra leverage in shaping destiny or something along those lines, in practice it just wasn't enough to stop the tide. To Aang's credit, it was quite possible not even the Avatar had enough power to stop things from escalating, when both sides of the conflict saw their enemies as less than human, and felt that they were fully justified in their pursuit of utter dominance over the other. Zuko supposed that there were only one person who would call off the attack now, and that was the Fire Lord. Bending's popularities and spirit allies aside, the one who held the most political power held the only kind of power that really made a difference. Zuko stretched his body and shook some snow off of himself. A few people passed by, were startled by the sudden movement above their heads, and continued moving at a brisker pace. Zuko paid little mind to them. No more waiting around, no more gathering information while wishing an answer will fall from the sky. I'm not the Avatar. Now all I have to do is stop under your war of hatred and killing, and call off the largest invasion fleet in history, and quite possibly kill Zhao. So far, the only viable plan Zuko had come up with was assassinating Zhao. However, the prince's distaste for the sort of activities aside, the biggest problem with that plan was that even Zhao's untimely death was unlikely to be enough to prevent the battle. With the invasion gathered and en route, not even change in leadership would enable calling the whole thing off. Whoever made admiral after Zhao wouldn't, and perhaps even couldn't, order the fleet to turn around and return to the Earth Kingdom. There would be a huge waste of resources and no noticeable benefit, and a suicide of anyone's political or military career. It just wasn't going to happen. Hello there. A voice greeted Zuko from below. The prince wasn't all too surprised to see Sokka waving at him. Zuko returned the greeting with a bow of his head, but didn't climb down from the roof. Whatever the reason, during the past couple of days, Sokka had become Zuko's shadow. Zuko was surprisingly smooth with the whole thing, although if the boy was suspicious of Zuko, he certainly hid it better than his sister. The constant following around was a little inconvenient, but also kind of flattering. Zuko wasn't used to people, rather than uncles, seeking out his company, ever since his banishment. He was literally and figuratively a branded man. Had a pleasant nap? Sokka quirked. Zuko did the equivalent of a shrug. Sokka's smile brightened a fraction. You bored yet? Zuko nodded only when Sokka shouted, "Excellent!" He realized he probably should have said no. The other team was obviously up to something, and as amusing as Sokka's antics could be, Zuko didn't have time for distractions. "So, I was thinking," Sokka began, speaking even faster than usual. "There's this girl who's been showing me the city, what with me being new to town and all, and she's also going through a really hard time, so I thought the least I could do was cheer up a bit, and I can't think of anything better than sightseeing cruise via sky, right?" Sokka considered for a moment, but went on before Zuko had time to communicate anything. "Okay, great. I may not have thought flying was the coolest thing in the world from day one, but it's grown on me, and I want to do something really special and unique to, impress her. So what do you say? You up for stretching your wings, say, tomorrow at noon?" Zuko had to give it to Sokka. The kid could really be honest with his intentions, and his plan to woo a girl was kind of cute in a shy hopefulness. Zuko wished he could be as straightforward and open about showcasing affection as Sokka, although that was a topic for another time. Zuko reached down with his tail to write his answer. Zuko read it quickly and looked up with a disbelieving frown. "Why not?" Zuko wrote further. Sokka made an exasperated noise. "Yeah, but that was like 3 days ago. I got it that a long flight from the Earth Kingdom to here, but you still could be out of breath. Appa never seemed to rest for that long, no matter how far." More writing. "Okay, I also got that Aang can be quite energetic, but you've kept up marvelously, and I know Qatar was a little too hard on you, since it was supposed to be a friendly sparring session and all, but it's nothing personal, really. She's just competitive that way." Zuko wrote a few more lines. Sokka read them. "Of course I could ask Appa, but I'm asking you. You're supposed to be my friend. This is the kind of thing friends do for each other." And Zuko felt a small twinge at that, and for a moment he figured the trip really couldn't take that long, but in the end he wasn't swayed from his decision. The wolf-tailed warrior sighed. To Zuko's relief, Sokka sounded defeated, but not terribly disappointed or angry, and Zuko had a knack for recognizing disappointment and anger. "Fine, I guess Princess Yuen and I are just going to have to make do with option number 2, the furry and safe and not as cool ride." Princess Yue? Zuko had heard a rumor that Sokka was dealing with the chief's only child, but he also gotten the impression from other gossip that she was already proposed to someone else. So what was Sokka's game? Well, it didn't really matter. It could actually turn out useful, sort of. Zuko leaned in front of Sokka and wrote that he'd been messing with him. Sokka looked delighted, and to Zuko's horror, hugged his neck tightly as thanks. In all honesty, Zuko was still doing this more to please Sokka than because there was a huge advantage in for him, but if he didn't have a plan by tomorrow, the sightseeing session would be at least a last-ditch effort. He doubted the princess would blurt out national secrets to her secret lover or his pet dragon, but at this point anything was worth a shot. Zuko would keep the flight short, though. He should preserve his strength, and, admittedly, he was still practicing having passengers on board his shoulders instead of his claws, and he really didn't want to risk accidentally dropping anyone. "Hey, Sokka!" A well-built young man ran to meet them, surprisingly undisturbed by the sight of a scrawny boy hugging a dragon. Sokka untangled himself rather quickly and greeted the newcomer. "Hey, Tora, was it?" "Yep, that's me. Look, you've forgotten this at the training grounds, and I thought I'd bring it to you straight away before I forgot." Sokka took the item he was given and thanked the young man. Tora said it was nothing, but Zuko noticed that Tora's attention wasn't in the conversation. He was looking past Sokka and Zuko at the waterbending training taking place further away. Sokka noticed that too. "You're a bender?" he asked, lifting an eyebrow. "Yeah, what? No, just interested, I guess." The taller boy gave Sokka a quick smile before returning his attention to the benders. "Say, Sokka, is that your sister over there? Katara's her name, right?" the older boy asked with calculated casualness. He brushed the dreadlocks away from his eyes, and somehow managed to stretch his bicep while at it. Daring to display, Toro never took his eyes off the benders, so he didn't notice the "don't even think about" look Sokka was giving him. She must be really talented if Paku agreed to take her on as a student. A bit short, but easily on the eyes. A girl like her must have had dozen suits back in the South Pole, eh? Tora ventured. Sokka did not look amused in the least. No, not really. She's only 14, you know. Tora looked unconcerned, apparently either oblivious to social clues or uncaring of them. Well, sure, she's a bit young to marry yet, but that doesn't mean that her father couldn't already be looking into options, right? But you say there's no one planned for her. Well, that probably would do with the temperament of hers. Such a personality might scare away some. But I, on the other hand, have always liked... Zuko snorted, but then his eyes narrowed as a strange scent caught his attention. It reminded him of the smell of dry seaweed, but an odd metallic flavor to it. It wasn't a particularly unpleasant smell, and it was quite faint, but something about it made Zuko restless. He had smelled it somewhere before, but where? And then all the pieces clicked into place, and when they did, Zuko pounced like a cat and landed with equal grace. He downed his foe, wiggling helplessly under his front paws. Gotcha! Sokka grasped speechless. Zuko growled a low, menacing growl, his teeth inches from Toro's face. Get it off of me! Toro wailed, flailing in panic, eyes wide with fear. It was an impressive performance, really, if not for the distinct lack of fear in the boy's seaweed-like smell. Cole, what are you doing? Sokka shouted, generally frantic. Toro's a nice guy! Not a nice guy, but... Zuko locked eyes with the creature under him. Toro went completely still and quiet, and then gave a small, appreciative smile. The blue-eyed spirit, still in disguise, leaned in what little he could and whispered so quietly that only Zuko could hear. You caught me. Congratulations. But what will you do next? Oh, and whatever you decide, do bear in mind, we have an audience. A crowd was indeed gathering around them, though most were keeping a respectful distance for now. Sokka explained to others that Cole was an ice dragon, and that he was only playing. It would never actually hurt anyone. But Sokka's empathetic tone of voice, and Zuko's guessed he said the last words more to the dragon than anyone else. The prince knew it was only a matter of moments before the entire water rain class would arrive on the scene, and they might jump at the wrong conclusion, but he still didn't let go. The spirit was trouble, and if it was here, it meant nothing good for the water tribe, or for Zuko. There was a bit of urgency in the creature's next word. If you even consider telling the tribe who I really am, rest assured, I will repay you in kind. And if you're not the only uninvited intruder hiding among their midst, which would you think they would find more threatening? A troublesome spirit, or the prince of the Fire Nation? The shouts around them got louder. Or, Naki spoke evenly and looked Zuko steadily in the eye. You let me go. He called this an honest mistake, and no one needs to be the wiser about who either of us really are. Zuko's yellow, unblinking eyes revealed nothing of what he was thinking. The water spirit glanced at the direction where the sound was coming from, licked his lips, and spoke fast. This looks bad, I know, but I'm really not as awful as you think. You don't have to be enemies. We have more in common than what you think. We could help each other. What's going on here? And a annoyed, sarcastic voice cut over the hum of the crowd. Master Paku's here. Time's up. Naki leaned in to whisper urgently. Zhao has a secret that he thinks no one knows about. It has to do with the invasion. Meet me at midnight tonight under the great bridge over the northern canal, and I'll tell you what it is. Naki leaned a little way to look Zuko in the eye, barely mouthing his next words. You are undoubtedly thinking, why should I trust this creep? 3 reasons. First, if you let me go, I won't out your secret and ruin your little undercover operation. Second, we both know I can't defeat you in battle, so you have a little fear from me. And third, the most importantly, because of information, I could potentially save thousands of lives. Look around you. They may not know it yet, but this place will go to hell in a handbasket soon, with or without my involvement. The question you should be asking yourself is, what have I really got to lose? Zuko stared at Naki, although he knew better than to think he could tell if the guy was lying or not. You will let that boy up right now, or I will, Paku was saying. He sounded unconcerned, but there was a distinct threat behind the words. Abruptly, Zuko got up and stepped off of Toro. Most people staggered back, but Paku stood his ground, looking unimpressed and most unassuming. Zuko knew there was no way the old man could have heard what transpired between them, but somehow the waterbending master looked suspicious under his usual calm demeanor. Are you all right? Aang asked in his innocent, curious tone, and offered a hand to the down boy. Katara frowned thoughtfully and looked at Zuko. The water spirit, still in the shape of a young water-tribe warrior, took the offered hand gratefully, got up quickly, and flashed a confident smile at the people around him. I'm fine. I wasn't scared at all. Just playing around. Naki's voice sounded again much more like you would expect from a startled young man, his tone conveying his still slightly worried but mostly okay, and trying to appear calmer than he really was to save face. Paku nodded, very slowly. Well then, thank you for wasting my time. Students, back to the arena now. That is, if you aren't too tired of failing already. Paku's students started to file out. The old master turned to address the rest of the crowd. Have you nowhere better to be, and nothing better to do, than watch children play? Slowly the murmuring crowd parted, going back to minding their own business, though many threw glances Zuko's way. Soon there was only Aang, Katara, Sokka, and Toro, and Zuko present. I am so sorry. Sokka turned to Toro. As soon as the outsiders were out of earshot, he really doesn't usually... No, it's fine, Toro answered, noticeably more tense than before, but smiled regardless. My fault, really. It's just me making enemies when I should be making friends. The spirits looked straight at Zuko when trying to say the last part, and then turned to Sokka. But oh, look how late it is. I really should get going. Well, if you're sure you're okay... Katara started hesitantly, glancing at Aang, who looked just as confused. I'm peachy, and Sokka, the stuff I said about your... The warrior glanced at Katara. The stuff I said earlier, you know that was all in good humor, right? That I didn't really mean anything by it? Zuko was frankly a bit surprised that Naka hadn't outed him anyway. He had to give it to the spirit. Naka could hold on to a story, even when his cover was under scrutiny. Playing it to the hilt, even. Sure, Sokka drawled out, though he still seemed dubious between Zuko and Toro. So, we're good, right? Toro made sure. You and me and your dragon? Yeah, we're totally cool. Look, what did Cool actually say to you when... Gotta go, see you later. The disguised spirit nodded a farewell to everyone in the group, glanced at Zuko one final time, mouth come as human, and was outside at a speed that would have been impressive to anyone who'd never seen Aang run. Katara turned to Sokka, hands crossed over her chest. What happened? Nothing bad or serious, I swear. Sokka assured her. For some reason, he was still willing to defend Zuko. It would seem Katara raised one dubious eyebrow. Really, it's fine, Sokka gestured and smiled brighter. Believe it or not, Cool was just defending your honor. Something about this picture doesn't add up. A trap was the first word that came to mind when Zuko thought of his mysterious midnight meeting. It was still at least an hour before the set time, and Zuko was waiting restlessly in the house the children had made for him. The large igloo was made by two talented but novice waterbenders. It wasn't a work of art, but the walls were solid and the entrance just big enough to accommodate him. It protected him from the Arctic winds and, most importantly, afforded him some amount of privacy. Zuko wasn't complaining. Zuko could always not go to the meeting, but that didn't seem to be a good reason enough not to. Other than that, Naki is probably setting up a trap for me right now, or perhaps, even more likely, miles away. As much as Naki had claimed he wasn't a threat, Zuko knew better than to trust a word that came out of his past assailant's mouth. However, if there was even a tiny chance the spirit could and would help Zuko stop the invasion, the prince had to try. Besides, this wasn't the most dangerous thing he'd ever done, nor the most desperate thing he would do to reach his goal. Zuko peeked out from behind the wooden door of the igloo, decided it was almost time, and pulled back inside. although he was pretty sure Uncle would have advised against it. Zuko intended to go to the meeting in his human form. If someone saw a stranger sneaking around, he would be in a lot of trouble, and that might be exactly what the spirit was planning. However, Zuko just couldn't think of a plausible way to go to a secret meeting as a dragon without someone noticing him. The risk was too great. Also, as much as being a dragon has its merits, Zuko missed his human body. Zuko concentrated, breathing in and out slowly. For a moment, he feared he couldn't change back. But fortunately, moments later, he was engulfed in flames. His next worry was that the multicolored fire would melt the igloo. But thankfully, it wasn't as hot as ordinary fire. Before moving out, Zuko checked that all of the belongings he had brought with him were accounted for. The prince had no idea where his clothes and things went when he transformed, but since they came back when he returned to his human shape, Zuko had decided to make the most of it. He had brought rope, high spikes for climbing, and his dowel swords, which had thankfully been still with its ostrich horse when the ship had blown up. Zara had provided Zuko with multi-layers, mostly silken, all-white getup, which Zuko was now grateful for. It was warm, durable, and the camouflage combined with Zuko's ninja training and knowledge of the city was seriously improved his odds of not being spotted. Leaving the igloo was the most crucial part. If he was seen exiting Cole's place of rest, someone might draw the conclusion that Cole was involved and couldn't be trusted. If Zuko was caught by any one other time, he might still be able to make a run for it, hide, and resume his dragon shape. Reluctant to take risks, Zuko used his firebending to see if there were any human-sized heat signatures in the vicinity. Scouting with firebending wasn't Zuko's area of expertise, but he was relatively sure that any living thing would stand out particularly well next to the icy walls and chilling air. Once Zuko was certain no one was close, which lessened if not entirely removed the risk of being seen, he walked out of the building. The entrance was made small, as Zuko's sleek dragon form could fit through, to preserve more heat inside, so human Zuko had to crouch to get out. Zuko quickly made his way to the shadows of another larger building. Although it was close to midnight, the nearly full moon cast dark shadows on the snow, and Zuko tried to stick to them whenever possible. After just a few minutes, Zuko could hear people coming his way. He climbed to a roof, which was something he'd been tempted to do from the start, but had avoided so far for the fear of being seen by someone from the palace, towering high above the rest of the city. Zuko had expected guards and patrol, but was instead passed by a group of teenagers from their giggles. The prince guessed they weren't supposed to be out this late. It was nice to see that some things were the same everywhere, even among the water tribes, who were usually thought to be all about purity and virtue. In fact, during the whole walk, Zuko encountered surprisingly few guards. It wasn't like there were no guards at all, but he expected the city to be on high alert with the invasion on its way. Though maybe the biggest invasion fleet of all time couldn't exactly sneak up on anyone, and in the meantime, the tribe had no reason to think the enemy had a man inside. Little did they know. Zuko figured he could have tried to blend in and walk normally like the teenagers he'd seen earlier, and hoped that no one realized he was an outsider. Still, Zuko feared his clothes, scar, and the late hour might draw attention to him. Despite its size, the capital had the small village feeling to it, meaning that everyone knew everyone else's business, and they would realize Zuko was a new face. If he was caught, he could try to claim he had arrived at the city only recently. Like so many, but even that alibi would likely not hold up to scrutiny. As Zuko would be unable to name any places or people outside the city, sticking to the shadows would have to do. Speaking of disguises in small towns, who was Naki portraying earlier? It wasn't unlike of the spirit to assume the shape of a known individual of the community, so maybe the spirit had done that, and trusted he wouldn't run into the real tower while at it. Still, if anyone knew to or heard of what had happened earlier today and asked him about it, Naki would be in trouble. It was more likely he had chosen the appearance of someone who was new in town, and not yet known by many. Zuko doubted the boy Naki had portrayed was actually a member of Sokka's warrior training class. Surely the spirit couldn't keep up the pretense well enough to enroll, and if he took the shape of someone who was originally on the class. The next time the real Toro and Sokka met, Sokka would know something was weird was going on. Zuko didn't think Naki would reveal his presence through a rookie mistake like that, nor did the spirit seem cruel enough to kill the person he was impersonating just to avoid detection. If Naki had done that when he was pretending to be Sergeant Jerry, it would have taken Zuko a much longer time to find the culprit, and Naki probably could have quite easily just slit someone's throat and tossed him over the railing. Not many would have been on alert for an attack while the ship was in the middle of the ocean. As much as it shamed Zuko to admit, if Naki had covered his tracks better on their first encounter, it might have taken Zuko weeks, if not longer, to realize there was a shapeshifter among his crew. Thankfully, whatever the water spirit's priorities were, maintaining his cover for as long as possible did not appear to be among them. Which of course led to the question, why had Naki been so worried about being found out today? Did he still have some business here that he could have finished if people knew of his presence? Or was there perhaps a bad blood between him and the Water Tribe? Zuko reached the Northern Canal without incident. The Great Bridge was one of the furthest up the hill, so it would still be a bit of a walk from here. Zuko hadn't been to this part of the town before, so he sat close to the waterway. In the water, Zuko could see his own reflection, and was a little surprised by his battered state. He hadn't forgotten that he had nearly died in an explosion less than a week ago, but a part of him had expected the cuts and bruises to have healed already. Apparently, dragon powers don't include in human recovery rates. Good to know. Zuko walked carefully, even though this part of the town was practically out of the way, and completely devoid of late-night walkers. He wondered if Naki had shown up. Would he come as Toro or himself? Now that Zuko was thinking about it, the guy Naki had been impersonating earlier probably wasn't even called Toro. That name had been Sokka's guess. Sokka was a smart guy, though, in his own way. He would eventually realize something was amiss when the kid his dragon had tackled down didn't show up training again, or he might even realize that no such person had ever attended. Still, as clever as Sokka could sometimes be, Zuko doubted he would ever guess what had really transpired. A shapeshifter just wasn't the simplest explanation, not unless the Avatar's lot had had their own run-in with Naki in the past. Which wouldn't be all that hard to picture. Naki even made the comment about Katara's temperament. I wonder if he was talking from experience. Zuko had originally presumed Naki was here for him. It was quite possible he was after the Avatar instead. Or maybe even Sokka or Katara, since they were the ones the spirit had shown more interest in. That might also explain why Naki had been so reluctant to be found out by someone other than Zuko. Maybe the game was still on. What are you really up to? And more importantly, why? There was a contradiction between what Naki said and what he did. On their first encounter, Naki made a big show of being his enemy. Why? Wouldn't it have been more useful to pretend that he was his friend and then stab him in the back? Why give Zuko a warning shot? Naki had done him great damage in sabotaging his ship, but he would have easily done more than just tinker with the engine had he chose to do so. Also, when Zuko had faced Huli with the matter, she seemed less than concerned. Zuko had presumed she just didn't show worry easily, but perhaps the dragon spirit knew more than he did. All in all, Naki didn't appear to be nearly as dangerous or uncaring of consequences as he wanted people to think he was. Zuko seriously hoped he was right in thinking Naki's bark was worse than his bite, since it was one of the main reasons he had agreed to this meeting. You are late. Zuko turned to face the shadowy alley between two tall warehouse buildings, but saw no one. He could see the gray bridge still some distance away, but apparently he would need to go no further. Zuko stopped into the alleyway. First, he saw a set of sharp teeth smiling at him. Soon, the entire spirit emerged from the shadows. Didn't think I'd show up, did you? Zuko was actually pretty surprised Naki hadn't bailed on him, though perhaps he shouldn't be. Zuko had a feeling words were Naki's weapon of choice, so from the point of view, it made sense of him to want to face Zuko in the innocuous form of a friendly chat. The prince could only hope his previous encounters with Tuli had prepared him to deal with the Namek water spirit.